Hello class. So today we're going to learn about discourse analysis. We're going to learn how to analyze texts and conversations, and we're going to get a little bit of like a basic overview of how to do a discourse analysis, and then you'll get to apply this material by doing your own analysis of your own on a text or conversation of your choice. So let's get to it. So to understand discourse analysis, the first thing we have to do is understand some definitions. So there are two definitions of discourse that you should be aware of, and there's only really one of them that we're interested in, but you got to be aware of both. So the first definition of discourse is often called the big D discourse, okay? And big D discourse is about the study of meaning or ideology embedded in language that is propagated through everyday language use. So when you hear people talk about discourse this way, usually they're talking about discourse as like there are certain discourses in our language that have certain ideology to it. So example would be marriage is between a man and a woman. So if you were interested in big D discourse, okay, when you look at a sentence like this, what you'd be looking for is some kind of ideology or system of meaning that is making this idea of marriage intelligible, okay? So one discourse that's embedded in this sentence, marriage is between a man and a woman, is heteronormativity, right? Because the whole idea of the statement is that marriage has to be between two opposite sex people. So that's an ideology of heteronormativity. So a simple statement like that you hear in the news or you hear in discussions about same-sex marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman. If you were to analyze that kind of rhetoric in, like, say, a campaign ad, you'd be seeing the rhetoric of heteronormativity, okay? Now, another way that you could analyze this sentence for discourse, big D discourse, is if you emphasize the A part, marriage is between a man and a woman, this could also be a discourse of monogamy, right? So we could interpret the sentence that way as well, because what that's saying is that you can't have one man and two women, or two women and one man, or two men and one woman. So I was trying to go both ways, and I'm like, wait, that's two ways of saying the same thing. Okay, so there's also a discourse of monogamy. Okay, so ideology essentially is the way we think the world ought to be. Okay, so a lot of our everyday language has some kind of ideology to it. It's saying this is how the world ought to be. And so a very rich case of where you see ideology is in debates, especially about social issues. Okay, so the key thinkers when it comes to big D discourse are Karl Marx and Michel Foucault. And so usually you have to really get in depth on what a big D discourse is and like what the limitations are. You really need to take more of a critical discourse analysis class, and unfortunately we're not going to be doing that here, okay? But for sure, whenever you hear the word discourse and they're talking about there are these discourses in the media about so-and-so, what they're saying is when they say these discourses, they're talking about different ideologies about something, okay? So if you take a rhetoric class here at Arkansas State, or somebody who's maybe a little bit more critical, like who's more of the critical paradigm, then this is how they're going to be talking about discourse in terms of ideologies. And they're called big D discourses because you're looking for them in our everyday language. So that's not the kind of discourse we're going to be interested in today. The other kind of discourse that we're interested in is called the little d discourse, okay? So little d discourse is basically instances of talk, okay, or communicative action through language. Now, we don't necessarily have to be talk per se, because, for example, instant messaging between people, that is technically communication through language and action, and it's just as equally analyzable as oral communication, okay? So that's why it's like we say something like communicative action, because IMing isn't technically talking per se, but it is communicating, okay? If you think of talking as being oral. So this is a whole little thing about what is communication, that kind of thing. What does it mean to say something? Okay, so that's why we just kind of say like communicative action, okay? So for this class, what we're focusing on is little d discourses, instances of where people are communicating, okay? And it's going to be recordings of it or transcripts of it or screenshots of it if you decide to do something that's more electronic. But it's going to be person A and person B, at least person A and person B, having a conversation of some kind. So here, I know it's kind of small, but this is a transcript from an interrogation. So a study that I plan to do that is going to be a discourse analysis is going to be a study of how police interrogate people, okay? And so little d discourse is the study of transcripts, conversations, and so forth. Okay, so we now know what discourse is. So what's discourse analysis? Discourse analysis is the systematic interpretive study of how people use language by taking utterances apart and analyzing their characteristics, okay? So what we're doing is we're interpreting what's going on in this interaction by looking at every line or every piece of the utterance that people are saying and really getting to the bottom of it, okay? So even the simple sentence, marriage is between a man and a woman. I already gave you 2 ways you can break down that sentence, okay? Now just imagine if it was like a paragraph or a couple of sentences that we could analyze. We could break it down by the sentence, we could break it down by the words choice that's being used, and we can break it down more in a thematic way as well, okay? So discourse analysis is all about what are people saying and how can we take that apart to really understand how this is all working. And we're also trying to understand, depending on what you're analyzing, you're trying to understand how people are getting by in a conversation, okay, or an interaction. Now, something to keep in mind, and this is something that keeps coming up in the research questions for qualitative, all discourse analysis is descriptive, okay? So remember, descriptive is focuses on is, okay, not what ought to be, okay? It's about what is the current state of something, not what is the best way to solve this problem, or how should people interact. No. Discourse analysis is, in this stretch of text, how did this thing happen, okay? So if anything, it's going to be past tense, like how do people get things done? Or it's going to be present tense, but it's not going to be prescriptive, if you know what I mean. It's going to be descriptive. How did this thing happen? How does what kinds of face work do people use in this setting? In this conversation, how do the doctors convey bad news to their patients? It's not how should doctors convey. We can't make those kinds of claims in discourse analysis. We can only describe and interpret information that we have access to, in this case, transcripts or records of talk. So keep it descriptive when you do your research questions. Also, discourse analysis is interested in the how or the why, not how many. So when you're looking at a study, like say police interrogations, we're not going to be asking questions like how many times does an interrogator use the word F, okay, or something like that. It's not a content analysis. Discourse analysis is all about how people get things done in a conversation, okay, when we're talking about analyzing conversations, which is what I want you to do for this week. You could analyze things like a newspaper, or you could analyze like, you know, a company policy manual, but that's going to be off limits for this week. I think for this week, we're just going to do conversation interaction because this is a communication class. So when you're doing discourse analysis of interactions, we're not interested in how many, we're interested in the why and the how. So you might ask, how do doctors convey bad news in the case of terminal illnesses, okay? So what you'd want to do is you'd want to find transcripts or records of interaction between doctors and patients. Now, it has to be an actual interaction. It can't be, well, in this newspaper, they reported, blah, blah, blah. That's not a discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is, here is the text, here is the conversation, and here's how it happened, okay? And what you're trying to do is figure out why and how. So you're having to analyze the text so that you can explain a process, not just the appearance of something, okay? So you often identify things, and then you find the relationship between those things. Okay, but that's a very important key for discourse analysis, especially as you formulate RQs. It's all about discovering a process, not counting things. So for the police interrogation, this is the study that I think I'm going to do at some point in my near future. And so my RQ is going to be something like, how do police interviewers use face work to elicit confessions from crime suspects? Okay. So I'm asking a how question. How do police interviewers, so I'm going to be looking at transcripts between police interviews and crime suspects, and I'm interested in the communicative practice of face work. And face work is all about how we how we protect our own and other people's projected self-image and interaction. So what I'm interested in is, how do the police kind of put themselves alongside a suspect, and how do they make room for the suspect to feel comfortable to confess for certain crimes, and how that's used, okay? Or how they make it seem like it's not a big deal if they confess. The whole idea of cops trying to be your friend, trying to uncover that, okay? And so we're asking, how do they do that? Using face work to elicit confessions, okay? So there, it's how, it's not how many, okay? And we're interested in covering a process. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to look at police transcripts, okay, of interrogations. And that's going to be my text that I'm going to analyze. And I have one, so we're going to look at it. So, key ingredients for discourse analysis. First, you need the research question. And like I said, research questions should never be prescriptive. They should always be descriptive. You're describing how something works. You're not explaining how it should work, or you're not giving advice on how it could work better. You're just explaining, how does this work, or how does this happen, okay? Descriptive. Another thing important for research questions is in qualitative research should be specific to your sample, okay? So your research question shouldn't just be like, how do people do stuff? Because people is a broad term, right? And you're not studying all people when you're doing a qualitative study. You're only studying maybe up to a size of 30 at most, right? So you need to specify it to your sample that you're studying. So if you're studying college students, then it should be, how do college students do this thing, okay? The other thing is, there should never be the word you in a research question, ever, okay? So if your research question has the word you in it, you wrote it completely wrong. So you need to rewrite it so it doesn't have that. The agent in a research question should be your sample population. So it should be, how do college students do X, Y, and Z, not how do you do X, Y, and Z, okay? So some important points that I've been noticing in some of the research questions. Okay. The other thing you need is a text, okay? So for your assignment this week, you're going to need to find or create through recording an actual instance of talk or language in use, okay? So you can use social media if you want, but it's going to need to be a conversation of some kind that you are not part of, okay? So you can't do discourse analysis on yourself, all right? So you're going to have to find a conversation between at least two people that you can analyze. If you want to use oral communication, everyday interactions, you're going to have to somehow get a recording of that, or you're going to have to recall everything that's stated, but recognize that recalled interactions are not as reliable, okay? So that's something that's going to be a limitation if you do something like that. And if you don't, and it's going to be hard to remember everything that a person says, and it's going to hurt the quality of your analysis as well. So, you know, you might have to just ask people, hey, can I record this conversation? It's for a class, and then, you know, go that way. Or you can find conversation that's been recorded somewhere else, but it can't be scripted, okay? So that's the important thing. Not scripted. Okay, so you can't do discourse analysis of a Friends episode. It needs to not include the researcher, so you can't be in the conversation. And it has to be between at least two people. Okay, so you can't have like, we're not doing discourse analysis of like artifacts. So like a Facebook post that has no responses, that doesn't count. It's got to have at least two people interacting, A, B, that kind of thing. Okay, so those are the key things that will need to be in your text for it to be a good one. And ideally, it needs to be long enough too for you to actually do analysis and to come up with a research finding. So it's hard to define long enough, but for the project this week, you're going to need to at least have 3 episodes to support a finding of some kind. And I'll explain what an episode is either. So you might need more than one conversation to come up with an answer. Okay. The third thing that you will need is, okay, so I was just giving examples. Okay, I forgot that was there. All right, so more examples. Email correspondences are okay too if somebody lets you use their email. But once again, it cannot be an email that you're a part of. Okay, then you also have, and this is one that's, I know, kind of controversial, but I call it a nice to have. That is knowledge, okay? You need to have some understanding of communication and action for richer analysis. So basically, if you're going to be analyzing conversation, you should probably know some basic terms about how conversation works and just some basic ideas. So that way, when you start analyzing line by line, you can have some things to refer to and some things to say. So we're going to spend a little bit of time going through some key terms and some just basic principles that can help you unpack certain parts of the conversation and certain lines. Okay, so first let's talk about transcripts real fast and how to do some things with that. Okay, so first off, in a transcript, when you look at a transcript like right here, okay, we have things called lines. And lines are basically these things, okay, line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6. So when you turn in your discourse analysis, what you're going to need to do is, with your transcript, you're going to need to make it look something like this, okay, where you have each thing lined out. So how you determine whether something gets its own line or not is technically up to you, how you do that. Ideally, you want the lines to be short so they're easy to break down and see. So you don't want like a line that's like going all across the page and then you just have a bunch of short lines. So you want to keep a sort of symmetry between it. And, you know, that's where, you know, depending listening on the conversation or just idea flow might be a way you decide when do you start a new line or not, or it might just be the formatting of the paper. But either way, you should have everything lined out all the way down, okay, in the conversation. There should not be any piece of the conversation that does not have a line number, okay? So it should look something like this. Now, then you have stanzas, okay? So stanzas are organized groups of lines. So here, Detective Baumiller is talking, and that's made into a stanza, okay? So the stanza helps demarcate that this is all one turn for Detective Baumiller. Now Mr. Sowell, the suspect, is going to talk in this little tiny stanza, then Detective Baumiller, and then Detective Durst is kind of sitting there, then Detective Baumiller, and then Detective Baumiller goes into a little introduction about what's going on. We want to talk to you about a woman who made an allegation against you about a rape. Yeah, that's true. I'm not saying this allegation is true, but she did make an allegation, so we want to talk about that, okay? So that was all part of his talk. So the transcriber, in this case, decided to give that its own stanza as well. So these are decisions that you have to make as a researcher, and you want to make it in a way that it makes sense, right? So it makes sense to probably make this its own stanza. What you want to avoid are these arbitrary, like, I don't know why this is a stanza, but that's not, that kind of thing, okay? So the first thing you're going to have to do when you get a text is you're going to have to break it up into lines like this, okay? Everything should be lined so it's easy reference. That's why you put the lines. So instead of having to go, so when you start analyzing the text, what you don't want to have to do is, okay, so after Mr. Sowell, or after Detective Baumiller gives his introduction, there's this part where Mr. Sowell says, you know, what's the best way I can help you with all this? And it's when Detective Baumiller says it, you can just easily say, so instead of having to say all that, you can just say, at line 6 and 7, you know, at line 6, Mr. Sal asks a question about the best thing to happen, okay? So it's much easier, very easy reference in your analysis instead of having to like try to like describe where you are in the conversation, okay? So line numbers make it way easier. You just say on line 15, such and such. On line 16, this and this. Okay, episodes then are particular instances of a discursive practice, okay? So the episode is basically, and it's in here, it's also up to the researcher. There's technically some technical aspects I would say, like this is probably an episode and this is not. But basically an episode is the whole thing, right? Like a large stretch of text that reflects something, okay? So let's say that this, I decided to call all of this an episode of acquaintanceship, okay? So what I'm saying is like the overarching theme within this stretch of text is acquaintanceship, openness, that kind of thing. Let's just say I was making that. So this is an episode of acquaintanceship. That is the overall theme of what's going on here. And in this episode of acquaintanceship, we see how the detective uses the introduction to do that, okay? So you have line, stanza, episode, okay? So one's very specific, one's middle, one's bigger picture. So for your discourse analysis study, you're going to have a research question, and you're going to need at least 3 episodes of something to support a general answer to your research question. Okay, so right now the requirement is 3. I might increase that, we'll see. But I want to at least see you analyze 3 different episodes of a communicative action. And when you show an episode, you want to not just show the part that's the meatiest, you also kind of want to give a little bit of context at the beginning. So let's see some of the stuff that happened before, and then some of the ending, some of the stuff that happened after. So that way you get a context. Because in communication, the basic conversational formula is ABA. You know, A says hi, B says hello, A says how are you, right? Okay? Because when A says hi, B may not say anything, okay? So B says hello, A responding to B's hello ratifies B's response, you see? So A's hi is ratified by B. B's hello is ratified by A. So ABA is the classic foundational conversation adjacency pair is what we call it, okay? So to contextualize something, you have to know what happens before, and you have to know what happens after it happens, okay? So that's what you want to do with your episodes. You want to explain what happens before and what happens after to contextualize your target B area. Okay. So now there's some terminology about conversations that I also want you to know that'll help aid part of your analysis, okay? Okay, so turns are utterances of discourse given by a speaker, usually elicited by another. Basically, a turn is, it's my turn to speak, now it's your turn to speak, okay? So, in a conversation, and let's look at this transcript, we have a turn here, we have a turn there, we have a turn there, turn there, okay? Mr. Sowell talks, then Detective Baumiller talks, then Mr. Sowell talks, then Detective Baumiller. So each of these is a turn, okay? So a turn is basically your chance to speak. Now there's some complexities that can happen with turns. Sometimes you have overlapping turns where 2 people are talking at once, okay? And sometimes you're talking and somebody just says uh-huh and you stop talking for a second and then you get back to what you're saying. Was the uh-huh giving up of a turn? You know, there's those issues that you can debate all you want. But either way, what you want to, when you're trying to refer a speaker talking, you want to talk about their turn, right? It's the speaker's turn, all right? The next part is moves. So these are actions we take through conversation. They're often speech acts. Now, this is very, very brief on speech acts. There's articles and articles about speech act theory and all that. Speech acts are basically acts that we do through talking, okay? So like there's talking, right? Hey, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. But there's certain talking that is also doing something at the same time. So an example would be promising, right? Promising is not just me saying something, it's me doing something, right? I'm promising that, tomorrow we're going to have a free day, like that is not just me talking. I wasn't just saying that, like that's actually something that's happening, okay? Naming a ship, right? I hereby name the ship the Enterprise. I'm not just saying that because it feels good. I'm saying that because by me saying I hereby name this ship the Enterprise, the ship becomes the Enterprise, okay? So speech acts are basically actions that we're getting done through talking. So asking, commanding, domineering, naming, proposing, promising, all of those are examples of speech acts. So what you can look at as you do your discourse analysis is the kind of moves that people are doing in their interactions. So a discourse analysis might look something like this. So in Detective Baumiller's turn, he starts off by saying, okay. And he says, so do you want to talk to us? Okay, so let's just read. Well, first let's just read it and then we'll analyze it. So, okay, so do you want to talk to us? I know you did get some sleep last night. I know you probably want to get this over with. Okay, so if we were to do a discourse analysis, we might say something like this. Detective Baumiller begins his introduction with a simple okay, indicating some kind of we're beginning now, right? Because okay tends to have that role. So do you want to talk to us? Is his next. On line 3, he says, so do you want to talk to us? And so he's asking the criminal or the suspect if he wants them to talk. And he follows that up with, I know you said you got some sleep. I know you said you got some sleep last night. So Detective Baumiller is indicating that he knows something about the criminal suspect and that he is opening the idea that this suspect may or may not want to talk to them still. And then he says, I know you probably want to get this over with. So this acknowledgement, I know you probably want to get this over with, is basically saying to the suspect that he understands, or he is portraying to the suspect a sense of understanding about what's going on with his life, and that in his situation he understands what may be, or he's portraying understanding of the suspect's situation, right? That, nobody likes to be in a criminal, interrogation, and that the suspect probably wants to get it over with, okay? So what you're doing is you're going through what's being said, and you're looking and you're breaking it down, okay? And you're not just summarizing what it's saying, but you're trying to provide an interpretation of what's going on in terms of how he's getting this done. So how is he getting this done? He's saying, okay, he's laying down, okay, we're beginning. So do you want to talk to us? So starting with an affiliative, do you want to talk to us? And indicating his knowledge of the suspect. He says, I know you said you got some sleep last night. So we see, do you want to talk to us? I know you said you got some sleep last night. I understand. He's affiliating with him. And he says, I know you probably want to get this over with. So he's displaying empathy or sympathy to the suspect, right? So that's how Detective Baumiller is starting the interrogation. See, I'm your friend, right? I know that you don't want to be here. We want to get you out of here, right? You got some sleep yesterday, right? Are you ready to talk to us? That kind of thing. So it's not like the movies where it's like, the suspect is sitting there and all nervous. Then the, cop comes in and he's like, he puts the chair backwards and sits in it. And he's all like, are you going to talk to us? That kind of stuff. Here in this transcript, it's all friendly, right? So that would be the beginning of the discourse analysis on face work, right? And then we can see how those affiliative moves are then used as face work for the suspect. You can also talk about adjacency pairs. So, and that's a move that's complemented by a prescribed set of moves, okay? So remember the ABA? That's a classic adjacency pair, right? A, B, A. Here, the adjacency pair is question, answer, right? So, but in this case, Detective Baumiller starts out, okay, so do you want to talk to us? I know you said you got some sleep last night. I know you probably want to get this over with. So he kind of asks a question, but then he follows it up with some statements, right? So what does Mr. Sowell do to respond to it? Well, he just asks another question, or Mr. Sowell asks a question with his turn. He says, what's the best way that I can help you all out? So he doesn't acknowledge the, oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you understanding what's going on with me, blah, blah, blah. That's not what Mr. Sowell does, the suspect. He just straight up asks a question. He answers the question by asking a question. Well, what's the best way that I can help you all out? So you see, like, even though Detective Baumiller, starts out with a question, so do you want to talk to us? And then he goes out of his way to say, like, I know you probably want to get this over with. Mr. Sowell's all like, what's the best way that I can help you all out? You see? So in terms of that adjacency pair, Mr. Sowell ratifies, well, just the last part, really. So that's it, okay? So you have kind of an interesting adjacency pair there, where the question doesn't get answered and the statement doesn't really get acknowledged all that much, and instead he just kind of says, well, what do you all need help with, okay? So that's more of the discourse analysis. So we would start off by analyzing the introduction, and now we would start analyzing the response to the introduction, okay, with Mr. Sowell, okay? And then sequential organization is how the conversation unfolds over time. So if we were to read a lot of this transcript, so this is only the first 28 lines, the transcript is a couple hundred lines, we would maybe talk about how this is all an introduction, right? And then it suddenly moves more to questions, right? So you have the introduction to the interview, and then later they start doing questions, okay? And he says, Rich, do you want to get ahead with that line? Who is? Pardon me, who is? Supposedly. Okay, so I don't have a, like later, like probably around line 50, or like 30 or 35, that's when they really start getting into the questions. So sequential organization is all about how conversation has order, okay? So think of a phone interaction. So this is what I was trying to get at. Think of a phone interaction. Sequential organization usually goes like this. Hello, okay, and then the person says hello. And then they usually say, if it's not the right person who answered the phone, you'll say something like, could I speak to Mr. Smith, please? And then the person who answers should be like, he's not here right now, or hang on a second, let me get a hold of him. So sequential organization in phone conversation is you have a greeting and then you have a summons, right? The greeting is the hello. The summons is, can I speak to Mr. Smith? You normally don't start off a phone conversation with, ring, ring, can I speak to Mr. Smith? And then somebody's like, sure, hi, by the way. You don't say hi after that. Usually it's hi, and then can you speak to Mr. Smith? Now, there can be some circumstances where maybe that's through the reverse, but usually there's a pressing matter. That's when you know there's something wrong, when the circumstances are, when the organization is reversed. I mean, you can probably think of a context where if you're in a rush, for example, or if a boss really needs something, they might just say, can I speak to Mr. Smith? Without saying hello. But typically, when there's not that kind of rush, we expect some kind of sequential organization, you see? So you can analyze at a larger level the sequential organization of the conversation. But here's the basic idea. You're looking within each turn. You're looking at moves that get done. You're understanding them in terms of how people ratify each other's turns. So you shouldn't just be looking at one turn in your discourse analysis. You should be looking at multiple turns, because that's how you get a look at the adjacency pairs. And you can make comments about sequential organization as you go, as an observation. Okay? So my discourse analysis would be an analysis of what this guy says, how he responds, and then how that's responded to, then that's how that's responded to, and so forth, until I think I'm at a good, until I exemplify the episode well enough, and then I would find another episode of something else. Okay? So that's discourse analysis. Okay, so here's how you report your findings. So you display key themes through the display of episodes. Okay? So here's how it looks. Okay? So with discourse analysis, you start off by just analyzing lines, okay? And then you take the lines that you study, okay, and from all the analysis there, okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to represent analysis, so we'll just say that. The analysis, we'll just say analysis of those lines. I made this too big. So let's say you looked at another set of lines, analysis, okay? And you take the analysis, and those are your, we can call them themes or episodes. Okay? Actually, just call them episodes, because then that's a little bit easier. Sorry, I'm like thinking of two things at once. Okay. Okay, so maybe this is all episode 1, or like these are all episodes. Okay, I'm sorry. So lines, analysis, and then each of these is an episode, right? And let's say these episodes, based on their analysis, kind of say the same thing or complementary to each other. Then each episode becomes an example of, you can call it a theme or a finding. But either way, this would be episode 1, that would be episode 2 of this general theme or finding, okay? So you start off with a bunch of lines, you come up with an analysis, and within that analysis, you know, you come up with a general common theme within it. So, you know, episode, and then this would be an episode of 1, and this would be episode 2 of another, somewhere else in the text, and this all supports a general theme that you report. So what you report is this, and to support your findings, you cite, here I'll use a different, you cite these episodes. Does that make sense? So let's say the theme was face work is used in the introduction through affiliation tactics. Then what I would say, that would be my theme, and then I would say, in the first episode, at the introduction, here's what the officer does. And then what I do is I provide my analysis and I show the text. And then let's say later in the interrogation, I'm like, and then here's another example, in episode 2 of affiliation tactics, here's what the officer does. So I talk about episode 2, and I bring up my analysis, and I show the text, okay? So the theme is displayed through the episodes, particularly the analysis and the text. That's what you're showing in the findings, okay? Now, let's see. Sorry about that. I was thinking of several things. It's late. Okay. Findings should be rich description of the line by line within each episode with the text displayed. So the key is you want to interpret, not just quote stuff. So you want to think of yourself as a sports commentator to a certain degree. What you're doing is you're commentating on what people are doing in this conversation, on their moves. But you're not just quoting though. It's okay to quote a little bit to like support an idea, but the bigger idea, the thing that we're looking for in a discourse analyst, what makes a good discourse analyst a good discourse analyst, is they can give good commentary and interpretation, and they can really break down what's being said and let us see what's going on under the hood of the interaction, rather than just being like, Mark said hi to Carrie, Carrie said hi back, Mark then asked her how she was doing, Carrie said she was doing well. That's bad discourse analysis, right? That's just quoting basically what people said or summarizing, okay? What you want to be doing is interpreting. Mark opens the conversation on Carrie by using a simple hi. Carrie responds to Mark's offer for a greeting by responding with a hi. So Mark then uses a conventional, hey, how are you doing, to or you can just say, hey, how are you doing, to eliciting some kind of response to Carrie. Carrie responds by saying, I'm doing nothing this weekend, how about you? Now that's a very boring conversation, there's going to be a whole lot going on there, but the idea is simple, that you're basically not just quoting, but you're trying to give a summary and you're trying to go under the hood in terms of what's actually going on. So use the 2 examples that are posted on Blackboard, or even go back to the discussion we just had about the interrogations. Okay, so you want to relate each episode to the larger theme or finding. So you decide, okay, once you go through a stretch of text and you're like, okay, here is an episode of something that I think is interesting. then relate that episode to the theme, okay, or the finding that you have. Okay, so the 2 sample readings this week give you great examples of how a discourse analysis should look. So first you have, and this is from the Beck and Reagan reading. The Beck and Reagan reading is about gynecology exams, okay, and how the, doctors and nurses balance between doing the gynecology exam and having the interpersonal interaction with the patient as well. Because the idea is that doctors are supposed to be professional, but at the same time they're supposed to be relational and personal. So when you're going through a gynecology exam, you know, it's a bit of a personal matter, but you got to be professional at the same time. But you still want to make the person feel like they are being cared for and that they're a human being. Now, if you don't know what a gynecology exam is, chances are you're a guy. Ask any girl, and she will tell you. Okay. Okay. So, anyways, in findings, there should be 3 pieces. First, the introduction of the theme. So I just took screenshots or pieces out of the Beck and Reagan article to kind of show you this is how it would look. Okay, so you introduce the theme. So in this case, it's keying devices. Now, keying is its own phenomenon, which I think they explain well enough in the paper if you need to understand it, but I'm not going to explain it for lecture just for time's sake. Then you have the stretch of text, right? The exemplary text, or the exemplar, okay? So this is actual transcript from a conversation between the gynecologist and his patient, okay, or her patient. I think it's a nurse, actually. But anyways, so you have the exemplar. So the first part is you have the theme. You introduce the theme. Second, you show the exemplar. And then thirdly, you show your analysis, okay? So that's part 3. So here, you'll then explain what this all means, okay? So your analysis is going through the line by line of this and explaining what we're supposed to take away from it. Now, notice that in this piece, you know, they say like in lines 72 through 82. So, okay, so they just work through the lines and that's how they make reference, okay? The other way you can cite lines too is you could just make your statement. I don't know why they don't do it here, but another way you can cite lines is just make your statement. So like, you know, Mark likes dogs. Okay, let's just say that was something that you were saying. You can just put in parentheses the line number like that, okay? So on line 90, Mark says Mark likes dogs. You could do that as well. So either way, you can start off with like in line 72 through 82, blah, 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 blah. Or you can just say Mark likes dogs, lines 90 through 91, or line 90 in this case, okay? But that should be the 3 things. The other study, by the way, so the gynecology one's a classic. So if you haven't read it, definitely read it. It's very interesting in terms of how it's done. I also couldn't decide between that and the other reading that I posted. The other reading is Talking the Dog by Deborah Tannen. Basically, it's about how people use their talking to their pets to talk to their partner, basically. So imagine that like you're sitting with your partner and your dog is there. How talking to the dog, people use talking to their dog to talk to their partner, basically. And it's all about ventriloquism, really interesting stuff. But that also has some great examples about how a discourse analysis would look, okay? So 2 very interesting supplemental readings this week. Definitely at least skim through them. Get an idea of what discourse analysis is about. It's really interesting. It's my favorite method out of all of them. It's what I do. It's what I did my dissertation doing. So discourse analysis is cool. All right. So final tips. Deep insights are born from in-depth description. So that's the key thing. Like my big concern about this assignment is people are just not going to do good description. They're just going to be like, Mark said hi, you know, and then like, Carrie said hello back, you know, and then they don't seem like they were sad, you know, and that's it. Okay, so the idea is, what is Mark getting done here? Okay, how is the discourse, how is the conversation developing? You need to be thinking at a higher level than just quoting and summarizing. Okay, so you got to be much higher level than that if you want to be good discourse analysis. Okay, so look at it on the syntactical level. Look at word choice. Look at themes that keep coming up in people's statements. Okay, Look at the use of metaphors. Look at the use of a certain tactic of some kind. Define that tactic and explain, here's how this tactic is being used across these 5 lines. Okay? So come up with a level that you're interested in and make sure your research question is one that you can address at that level in your text. Okay? So look at it at multiple levels. Play with it. That's the cool thing about qualitative research, is that you can look at things from multiple lenses and you have all this flexibility, and that's what makes it cool. Okay, another rookie mistake that will happen, and so I made sure to make this a point because I always forget to mention it. In discourse analysis, all we know is the text, okay? So when there's a conversation between Mike and Mary, I can't really make claims about what Mike thinks or what Mike believes or what even Mike is trying to do, because psychological and cognitive claims are off limits in discourse analysis. All we have is what people are saying. That's all we can look at, and that's all we can make claims about. I have no data about the gynecologist's personal history. I have no data about the gynecologist's mood. Like, is the gynecologist happy? Is the gynecologist sad? I have no idea. There's no way to know by the text. So in the text, I can't say the gynecologist was mad. That's a psychological claim. Now, if in the text, though, it's kind of like the gynecologist makes some kind of rude comment that's like, I don't know, get away, women, gross, okay? You might say the gynecologist exhibits very aggressive, or you can say aggressive is kind of judgmental, but you can just say the gynecologist uses certain insult words, or uses I think aggressive would be okay. I think it's kind of objective. Uses aggressive words against the patient, but I can't necessarily say he's mad. I can just say that he's using aggressive terminology, right? So the idea is that people can say stuff just to say stuff, and I could say something and feel completely different than what I'm saying, right? It's called lying. It's called faking. It's called acting, right? We have to act a lot of times. So we can't really make claims about person's beliefs, person's personality. We can't really go there. All we can say is, here's what this person exhibited, okay? And when you say here's what they exhibited, what you're saying is, here's the words that they used, and here's what it shows to Chris, and the reason we know that's what it said is because here's how Chris responded to it. You see what I mean? So keep all the analysis, okay? So if we draw people, the analysis is here, okay? And I'll put it in red. It's here. It is not there. It is not there. It is here, okay? That's what we're analyzing, the in-between. So stay away from psychological claims, cognitive claims. Keep it all on how does the conversation take place? How does the conversation develop? How does this particular speech act get done? Okay? It's all about what's going on here, not there, not there. Okay? So that's a harder lesson to learn, and it takes some training, and I didn't always easily fall into it quickly when I first started learning discourse analysis, but now you know, and we'll be looking for that when we're grading for discourse analysis. But otherwise, discourse analysis is a lot of fun. You can use it for all kinds of real-life applications. Anytime you get strange text from a friend, or, what does he mean by this? In your text message, you're doing discourse analysis, okay? So if you have any questions, feel free to send them my way. And I wish you all luck on this week's discourse analysis.